Hi, welcome to Splash and Go. I'm your host, Nate Ryan, here with Jeff Burton at JTG Doherty Racing, where Chris Buescher had a really good run Sunday, ruined, unfortunately, by a loose wheel. Another driver who had a tough Sunday with a very fast car was Kevin Harvick. He was penalized because his car didn't pass pre-race inspection 3 times, had to do a pass-through penalty. Let's talk first. How do you feel about that penalty? Too stiff or about right?
No, I like the penalty. If you can't pass tech, after 3 times, I like the fact that it's a stiff penalty. I think that's the only way you'll ever keep people from not continually not to pass, is to have stiff penalties. Now the team will tell you, hey, look, we failed every time we went through for something different, and so they were frustrated because they felt like the machine wasn't as consistent as it needed to be. But you have to believe in something, and if you're going to use the machine that already has some tolerance built into it, I'm a fan of big penalties. Now I will say this. A pass-through penalty on the green at Bristol is completely different than a pass-through penalty on the green at Pocono.
Right.
So
where you don't fall down a lap at all.
Correct.
At Bristol,
yeah.
He fell down 2 laps, I believe. Yeah.
So that's, I think, I like the consistency of the rule, and I know it would make things more complicated. Another explanation for a rule, but maybe a lap penalty everywhere. Somehow could find a way to make that work. I think that would make that rule better, but I'm a fan of harsh penalties.
Gotcha. Well, Kevin Harvick was able to rebound. He actually went 4 laps down when that team had a loose wheel after an early pit stop. Comes all the way back, finishes 13th, finishes on the lead lap despite all of those problems. He had the fastest car on Saturday, really the fastest car, I think, for a lot of the weekend, Jeff. Last week, he called out his team and said, we need to be better. What do you make of his car being so fast at Bristol after those comments at Texas?
Well, listen, I know that they're all working really hard. I know Rodney Childress didn't all of a sudden say, well, Kevin's mad, so we got to build the race cars faster. You know what I mean? So I do believe that we're seeing an evolution in not just with Harvick and his team, but with every team. You have to remember, we started this year with a whole new set of rules. And every racetrack is a new adventure. Every racetrack is an opportunity to learn something completely new because you are at a different facility. And even the 1.5 miles we've been to, we've not been to a 1.5 miles that is the same. You know what I mean? They've been to very different 1.5 miles. So I just think you're going to see more of an evolution this year as opposed to other years in the change in who can run well. I don't think that Penske and Gibbs are going to dominate through the whole year. I think some teams are going to come and they're going to catch up to them because there's so many different things. And I think that's what you saw at Bristol. I think that not only was Harvick fast, also Clint Boyd was very fast. He was a Stewart Haas car, so I just think you're going to see an evolution.
So even though Harvick has been kind of off his game, really, I mean, he's getting consistent top 10s, but since Texas last year, they haven't been quite as dominant or winning. You think that that's still evolving? Richmond could be another step for that team.
Listen, we talk about this with Hendrick all the time. The disappointment of Hendrick and how they're running. The same can be said about the 4 car. We have such high expectations, and they have high expectations of themselves. When you see a team dominate the way they dominate practice, dominate races, and they don't do that, then there's something that's not 100% right. They're not running badly. They're running badly in comparison to what they normally do.
Right.
And they're not a team that's going to be happy saying, okay, we're the 3rd best team behind Gibbs and behind Gibbs and Penske. That's not their fabric. And that's not what they are. There's some other teams that are trying to build themselves. This is a great example. JTG. They would probably be okay right now with where they are if they were the 3rd best team. But once they're the 3rd best team, they're not going to be happy with that anymore. They're going to be the 1st best team. So we look at each team individually for where they are and what we've seen them do in the past. So under that scenario, you have to think the 4 car just isn't as good as they've been.
Yeah, well, clearly the best cars right now are the ones you mentioned, Gibbs and Penske, class of the field, and Kyle Busch wins at Bristol after beating Joey Logano and Brad Keselowski. We saw some great battles, even though it was a familiar storyline. And the 2, the 22, the 18 had some great battles for the lead. The 14 was in the mix. A lot of interesting storylines developing there, Jeff. So, and comes on the heel of a really good Texas race.
Yeah, listen, we had the best race of the year at Texas, and then they got followed up with the best race of the year at Bristol. And let's hope it gets followed up with the best race of the year at Richmond. A lot of that has to do with how many people can run well. Mm-hmm. The more cars you have that can run well, the better the racing we're going to see. And also the tracks. Bristol's the kind of racetrack you expect to see a good race. And Richmond's the kind of racetrack you expect to see a good race. I thought Texas was a really good race as well. So, we as fans, we clamor for those awesome races, right?
Yeah.
And everybody has a different idea. But if you weren't entertained Sunday rather, and Saturday at Bristol, then that's not a whole lot that's going to make you happy, because both of those races were really good.
What do you think was the key to Bristol being so entertaining Sunday? Was it that, as you said, more competitive cars, the traction compound, the nature of the racing, the high, the 750 horsepower, the higher spoiler, combination of all those things?
So yeah, I think a combination of all those things. I don't really know the impact of the taller spoiler. I like how that made this race different than last year. I know going into the race, I heard a lot of drivers say the track was no good, you couldn't pass, with the high downforce, and you weren't going to be able to pass anybody. None of that came true. I think they went into it afraid of all these things, but the truth of the matter is we saw a lot of passing. I don't know how many cars Kevin Harvick passed. Clint Boyer passed a ton of cars. The Penske's passed a ton of cars. There was a ton of passing going on, so none of those fears came true. I think you have to give the racetrack some credit. If they were not working on that bottom groove, you would see a top lane race. It would be the only way you could pass. It would be almost impossible to pass. And a top lane groove where you can't pass is no good. A bottom lane groove where you can't pass, that's okay, because now you can root somebody out of the way and take that spot. But when it's only the top groove and you try to move them out of the way, they get in the wall and they wreck you. And that doesn't work. So Bristol, recognizing that racetrack was not the position it needed to be in several years ago, being innovative, creative, coming up with this, and catching hell for it too. Right? I mean, on Friday, some of the drivers were, all but saying, telling everybody the race was going to be horrible. This sucks, that sucks. It was like this terribly depressing. And then Sunday, none of that came true. And none of that came true on Saturday either. So that's where the track's getting in a difficult situation. So who do you listen to? I mean, who do you listen to, right? And so I think you got to give the track some credit.
All right. Well, we're glad the drivers are wrong in this instance. Looking ahead, Richmond, possibility for 3 straight entertaining races. You've said before that you think the high downforce package tends to favor the action on short tracks. So you think we could see that at Richmond?
So what's fascinating to me at Richmond is does the top lane work? So the top lane kind of went away. And then with the super low downforce package, it came back. All right, so now I'm wondering with the super high downforce package, if you can run the top. That to me really makes a Richmond race. That makes it better. Multiple groove racing in 3 and 4 at Richmond makes that really, really interesting race. So my thought, I just don't know. When they took downforce away, the top lane came in, but they never raced with this much downforce. And if you watch other forms of racing, like you watch the IndyCar race, they can run anywhere because they make so much downforce. So I wonder if that's not going to happen with these cars. But I think the smaller the track, the better opportunity for good racing. And Richmond typically has put on good races. I'm just really fascinated to see what happens in 3 and 4 with that upper groove.
Right. Well, we'll have an eye on it this weekend as NASCAR heads to Richmond, see if it can deliver a 3rd straight compelling race. Meanwhile, NASCAR America, weekdays, 5 p.m. Eastern on NBCSN. Tune in for Motor Mouths to see what Kyle Petty has to say about Bristol and Richmond tomorrow.
Hey NASCAR fans, thanks for checking out the NBC Sports YouTube channel. Make sure you hit subscribe below for the latest NASCAR news, race highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.